Good morning. Welcome to Law Power Hour. We're reaching the end of the year, and there's a very important topic that is just in its embryonic stages in Michigan and in the country. A couple weeks ago, Los Angeles passed a referendum and permitted the sale of marijuana on a, for lack of a better term, on a social basis. It's not necessary to have a medical marijuana card any longer in Los Angeles. Today I have Dr. Michael Whitty with us. Thank you for coming, Doctor.
Glad to be here.
And he is an expert in the area of medical marijuana and the social impact of medical marijuana. And he's spoken all over the country. He's currently at the University of Michigan Detroit campus teaching a class in public health dealing with these issues.
Yes, it's the University of Michigan Dearborn program on health and human services with a new course that I'm pioneering there called Responsible Drug Policy Reform, with the deliberate intent to put the word responsible in front of drug policy, just as we would expect the alcohol industry to continue to fund the education of alcohol drinkers to be responsible drinkers, or as my elders have taught me, everything in moderation. I say, is it okay to have a glass of wine? They said, yes. At your age, only one glass a day is advised for your medical condition at your ripe old age. So responsible use of wine or beer, and everything in moderation. A responsible use of cannabis by adults. We call it adult use. That'd be the term of the new ballot initiative everyone gets a chance to vote on next fall in our off-year election, November 2018, on the legalization of cannabis. To treat it like we would treat alcohol, treat marijuana like alcohol, regulate and tax.
Currently we have a drug battle going on with Oxycontin, Oxycodone. Yes. There's a drug on war.
Well, the opioid crisis is something I included in my classes, and they have a phrase that's come out, a compassionate response to the opioid crisis, which is terrible, and their phrase is hope, not handcuffs. They've actually gotten law enforcement engaged in a new collaborative approach to save lives, and that goes to something I teach at the drug policy course called harm reduction. So they're trying to save people's lives, and they recognize that incarceration is not a public health policy. Incarceration is not frugal use of tax money. Incarceration is tying up cells, even local jail cells, which can be better utilized from frugal and intelligent community policing. So we're really talking about some rather important trends in criminal justice reform and policing, community policing. We get to the whole question of the racial aspect and class aspect of law enforcement, where the poor and the stigmatized minorities get hit hard by the criminal law.
Well, this is what we're trying to change. We're trying to get rid of nonviolent drug crimes and the incarceration associated with the nonviolent drug crimes and the records that are generated that interfere with individuals' ability to find employment. I'm trying to break it down for our audience.
Sure.
And to
well, I put it this way. The use of, say, cannabis, you might view as immoral, and that the child or an adult should never use it. And that's okay. To reject the use of alcohol or cannabis is fine with me, as long as you don't have a disproportionate punishment. The punishment currently doesn't fit the crime. In other words, we want to stop the arrests. We will acknowledge that it might be wiser never to take up alcohol and never to take up marijuana, and it certainly would be reasonable for people to reject the consumption of these dangerous products that ought to be used with respect and great caution and restraint, that we just don't need to stigmatize for life the grandchildren for something that is less harmful than wine. We're simply saying that punishment doesn't fit the crime, and it has a high racist quality to it, and it's a war on the poor, and it just makes things worse in terms of police-community relations, which are bad enough as they have always been. I was in Selma in '65. I saw the movie Selma. I came out of the movie and realized, my God, the police are killing more black people today than the Ku Klux Klan and the FBI under Hoover were engineering against the civil rights people in Selma. The black community is under siege by racist cops who are trigger happy and panicky and ought never to be employed as police officers in an urban policing enforcement role. There's some people that don't belong carrying a gun, and that includes people with uniforms.
Well, unfortunately, minorities have been under siege for centuries in this country, and they've been under siege not just because of drugs, for many other reasons. And we're under siege in Detroit right now because Whitey's on the move, coming into the city at the expense of poor people, buying up all the property, putting up all these edifices and not putting anything back into the community. Now, I said that for a very specific reason, because it takes a lot of money to open up a dispensary, doesn't it?
Well, it might. Depends on how heavy the regulations are. The state of Michigan is putting on very heavy regulations that are onerous, I think unreasonable. The city of Detroit passed some ordinances which were also a little bit overreaching, driven by a defensiveness and a fear of a small dispensary on Grand River might cause panic in Rosedale Park. Those kind of things go with urban life. You're always going to have zoning issues, and recently the city's majority, 60%, passed two referenda in the last mayoral election in Detroit, A and B, by 60%, that wanted to loosen up and give small business a chance to operate. The fact that some of the ownership of business is foreign, is not Detroiters owning the business, has been true from the beginning, probably, of suburbanization. As soon as we developed suburbanization, there's maybe some rich person that lived in Highland Park in some of those fancy houses on Commonwealth and wasn't a Detroiter. You know, there's going to be somebody in the suburbs owning something in the city. I'm with you on you know, having black enterprise get a fair break on the business opportunities, especially in urban centers like Detroit and Flint and Grand Rapids and other cities. That brings us into a whole lot of capitalism and small business and ethnic entrepreneurialism. It's a whole new discussion. That's a show for the future there.
Well,
but I'm with you there on the tendency to feel that even when we make a reform, a humane reform, like stopping arresting young people and stopping the arresting people who are driving while black, stopping the racist police enforcement, and stopping the arrests is my highest priority. The fact that some suburbanite has poached on the city's turf is a secondary issue. You've got to have some trade-offs in getting reform. So we're trying to start with stopping the arrests for simple possession. Well, whether we should have ever had dispensaries in the first place, I'm willing to open it wide open to callers. Frankly, I'm from the old school. I don't see why we really absolutely needed to go public and have dispensaries or commercialize the hell out of it. Why not just get friendly with somebody who's a good gardener or grow your own and supply your friends over the holidays in a festive way when we get adult use next year, assuming we win that ballot issue. They have filed with the Board of Canvassers 350,000 signatures. They have Truscott Rossman out of Lansing, one of the top political firms in the state managing the campaign. We hope we can language the education of the public not to fear that this is going to threaten the neighborhood or the city or the children or the schools. That there's going to be local control. Each county and city can opt in or opt out. Most cities in Michigan are going to opt out. That's going to mean the cities that opt in, like Detroit and Ann Arbor, are going to have a visibility to the citizenry that will require getting used to. Now, the people of Ann Arbor have learned to get used to it. I think that the majority of the citizens of Detroit have learned to get used to it. It's no big deal. It doesn't threaten the neighborhood. It may actually make the neighborhood more secure. Occupied storefront is better than an unoccupied storefront. A business that will put out some security, that may help the neighborhood. Any anchor along some of the desolate thoroughfares of Detroit is a comeback anchor. I'm not viewing it as harming the neighborhood. I think you could argue it marginally helps the neighborhood.
Well, here's what I think we should do. I think if you're going to allow the business, especially this kind of business, to exist, you should have a rule, a residency rule, that the owner must live within the city that he or she is operating their center from. And let me explain to you why.
Okay.
Then the owner has ties to the community.
Yes. Yes.
The owner is not driving over 8 Mile Road, coming into Detroit, selling the cannabis, and then going out to Bloomfield Hills or to Farmington Hills or West Bloomfield and living there and divorcing himself from the situation that he's dealing with in the city every day. He's more accountable. He's more responsible. He's invested in what's going on.
Yeah, that's a subject that I lived with as a civil rights guy all these years. But if you do that, you're going to say, well, Matty Maroon, maybe he lives in Grosse Pointe, and so he shouldn't be able to own that bridge. I mean, you're going to start, you open a can of worms. You're not just saying it happens to be something magically sinister about this little plant called marijuana that or you're talking about all those big shots who are wealthy in Grosse Pointes and up in Birmingham who own something in Detroit. They shouldn't be able to own it or buy it, and they have to move into Indian Village or Palmer Woods or somewhere in order. I mean, there's some folks who are African American who live in Southfield, and they might be investors in the game, and they might have a suburban attitude as well.
Well,
you're talking about city and suburb.
You're talking about another issue with me.
Yeah.
You're talking about all those tycoons who ran like rats from the city and moved out of Palmerwood, moved out of Indian Village, and moved out to the suburbs as far away as they could after the Detroit riots. So we're not going there today.
Okay.
I'm talking about people who are running these programs.
Yes, yes.
I'm talking about people who are selling medical marijuana. They need to be tied to the community because of the impact on the community.
Well, it would be nice to have these kind of arrangements. They had the big debate over Southwest Detroit and the Second Bridge. Should there be community benefit riders that say, well, you develop something, you have to share with the community. You have to hire from the community a proportion of people. You have to be a good neighbor. And I coach people. I've taught at Oaksterdam University in Oakland, California, advocacy for entrepreneurs, and I say, you got to make friends with your neighbors. Your neighbors are the people who can snitch you in, or they can be immediate, or they can be City Hall and the city planner and the mayor and the chief of police and the sheriff. So you need to cover the Benny Napoleon, and you got to get down and talk to your chief of police, and you got to talk to Mike Duggan and Butch Hollowell and educate them. So we're putting some detail ahead of the broader listenership here today, which you just need to grasp the fact that the cannabis is less potent than alcohol, less harmful to the human body. Its behavioral effects are not violent where alcohol is. If we've learned to live glumly with alcohol, with its tragic shortcomings and failures, and as a dangerous substance that most of us don't respect enough, and haven't in our lifetimes respected enough. If we've learned to handle alcohol, marijuana is small potatoes in terms of community, neighborhood, and society in general. It's small potatoes, and the increased use of marijuana due to legalization or adult use is infinitesimal and relatively insignificant. There hasn't been that much increase in use because alcohol is king, beer is king. People will stay with the drug of choice for the holidays, which is alcohol. So it's not going to change the world for 99% of the people that are listening. People who use the marijuana have been using it for years, have found a way to get it, didn't need to go into any dispensary to get the stuff.
Okay, let's talk about that for a minute.
They didn't even have to go to the street, by the way, to get it. They can get it from their friends. They can get it from reliable friends, just like somebody who has a truck garden and has raised up some extra tomatoes and wants to sell you, like Eastern Market, a bushel of tomatoes. That's how you can get what you need for whatever it may be. Adult use just simply to relax in a safer way than drinking, or the medical pain that comes with aging, and pain management with cannabis is safer and not addictive in the sense that the big opioids are. So some are arguing that cannabis can be used as a substitute for opioids, or for people who have high opioid use, medically approved, they could cut back the opioid use and substitute cannabis as an analgesic. So there's a lot of medical applications. That's another whole show, and I could bring you a doctor for that who can speak precisely to the many diseases and the applications for medical.
Good morning.
Oh, good morning. I have a question, and I've been wondering this forever, ever. Why aren't all of the liquor stores and party stores all in Detroit? They're not in the Grosse Pointe Shores, Farms and Hills, or whatever. Aren't in the more affluent suburbs, and so also the cannabis places. Why do they all have to be in Detroit? What's that about?
Well, two things. There are the liquor stores all over the place, believe me. Even the little towns have a liquor store. You're right, the city seems to be always stereotyped as liquor stores and churches. So it's a stereotype that probably a little overblown. The fact is that there's a hostile Macomb County prosecutor, and there's a hostile Oakland County prosecutor and hostile sheriffs in those counties, and they want to keep these outfits out of their county or out of their cities, and therefore Detroit is a marketplace that has a different attitude than Oakland or Macomb. We're working really hard to reach conservative people, to reach the churches, black and white. We're trying to reach the not-for-profits, the drug counseling professional networks, and have them adopt a more humane, a more sensible, more realistic policy to handling marijuana. So actually, if things go well and we legalize it for adult use next year, maybe certain areas can be developed as business attractors. You could create a scene that would actually enhance investment and improve certain selected neighborhoods in Detroit if there was a conscious, planned, collaborative, and coordinated strategy, which is not yet in place. The community needs to relax and accept this as a minor transition, not a big problem, potential benefits yet to be fully explored, and we'll have to convert Oakland and Macomb. Believe me, we're working very hard. We're just working against Republicans and conservatives.